All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Frances Klingenberger. I am the Manager of Strategic Programs at the Greater Bakersfield Chamber. And on behalf of the Chamber and the Bakersfield Young Professionals, I would like to welcome you all to this morning's webinar. I would like to thank our sponsors, Strata Credit Union, Comprehensive Blood and Cancer Center, and Kearney's Business Technology Center for sponsoring this program so we can bring you all free weekly webinars. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some Zoom etiquette to make this run as smoothly as possible. First off, I'd like to let everyone know that this session is being recorded to share for later in case someone couldn't make it or you have to jump off to hop into another meeting later. And all of our webinars are uploaded on the Chamber's YouTube channel. If everyone can go on mute unless you're speaking, this will help reduce any feedback and background noise. And finally, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat, or you can raise your hand and come off mute to ask Ryan your question. So I would like to introduce our speaker, Ryan Nelson. He is the Talent Acquisition Lead at Aera Energy. Ryan is a California native who grew up in a resort town, went to college in a resort town, and found his home in Bakersfield when Aera hired him in 2000. Over his 20-year career with Aera, Ryan has had the opportunity to design and develop programs within the company to find and develop people. Ryan is a husband to his wife of 18 years and a father to 5 kids. Ryan attributes a portion of his success to a great company that helps employees connect and find purpose, grow both personally and professionally, and thrive inside and outside of work. The other portion of his success is due to his wife. Together, they have run Sunnybank Farms for 12 years, which started as a horse boarding facility, but now includes breeding and selling pygmy goats. Besides horses and goats, the family's love for animals extends to a menagerie of 2-legged and 4-legged friends. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Ryan to get started on today's presentation. Off to you, Ryan.
Thank you all, and I appreciate your hospitality and opportunity to present. And I guess I didn't realize that was going to be my introduction on the presentation as well. So I actually read that to my wife later, and she said, you probably need to specify that my wife is not 18 years old. I've been married to my wife for 18 years. So just if that wasn't clear enough, I figured I'd mention that. So, but anyways, I really appreciate y'all letting me present. And as I was talking to Tanner Ottaway, who's part of the group, and we've had some pretty good conversations around what it means to kind of plan for your career and what are ways that you can be successful going forward. So, I think with that, maybe I'll start off by, if it works correctly, there we go. Why talk about career planning and development? And within my job, and as my introduction kind of said, I'm responsible for talent acquisition in the company. But I've had a chance to ultimately fill a lot of different roles that provided me a breadth of experience and exposure to conversations with employees, with leaders, and really have the company perspective around what makes it successful. Sorry, my dog is sneezing in the background. But ultimately, the themes and the conversations that I've had over 20 years, that there was one kind of resounding theme that came out of all the different conversations and experiences I've had. And it was really about the opportunity to, I guess, communicate between employer and employee. And maybe I'll leave it that general, but ultimately talk about, why is this issue important? Why would you want to sit for the next 30 minutes or so and listen to what I'm talking about? So, I think when we look and the conversations we've had, and I'll share a little bit about Aera's journey to kind of help set some context. But as we've been looking and doing some research as Aera's been in our own journey, attrition ultimately makes a case for action, right? Is the top 5 reasons that employees left their previous company. 2 of those top 5 are around career plans, career opportunities, and developing professionally. And so that's kind of that's an alarming case, right? And so when we look at that, and we the reality is that companies aren't really helping themselves either. And so in this graph, it's showing that companies continually or over time has increasingly hired more external candidates than internal candidates, meaning that they're not moving people through, they're not encouraging that development. And I think what you'll hear is Aera's gone through that same experience, and we're kind of at a crossroads now where we're trying to encourage that of our employees. And so when you keep kind of going and you keep digging a little bit deeper, in the conversations that I've even had with some of our own employees, was that it was a little bit alarming. And I'm not sure if you can see the percentages here, but the ones that stand out to me, right, is 73% of the employees that were surveyed in this particular survey from Gartner, who's a well-known HR research firm and consulting firm, that they said 73% of the employees that were surveyed could not find internal opportunities easily, right? So that's a missed opportunity, both for employee as well as for companies, right? But then you go a little bit deeper, and there's only 70% of the employees don't think that the companies show a clear path for career growth. So it's not visible, and it's not easy to find. And then 65% of the employees aren't even comfortable talking to their boss about what those career opportunities are, right? They'd rather go to another company. They'd rather talk to a headhunter. They'd rather move companies than to have to talk to their current boss about, how can I grow within the company? And so I think that was pretty alarming. And so, particularly when we're in an uncertain economic time right now, and companies, oil, any particularly in Bakersfield, right, with oil and ag and the uncertainty that's been kind of hitting California in general, companies are really having to evaluate their options. And they're, in this picture, it's more of it's not really a black or white, it's more of a spectrum, right? So on one side, you have more ownership, where it's either the leader's responsibility or it's the employee's responsibility to kind of own their development. And there's not really a partnership, which is then on the right-hand side of the process, right? And so it's kind of this spectrum. And ultimately, as companies are starting to look at or think about, how do we make opportunities, internal opportunities, more visible, employees, and why it's now important to you, and kind of why you're here, is you can actually play a very influential role. And so that's the conversations that we're even starting to have within Aera, is figuring out how to encourage those employees to participate in what I like the phrase is it's an internal labor market, right? That's HR speak, right? But essentially, when you go into the labor market outside and you're looking for a job, that's considered an external labor market. What companies have talent within their own walls that they're not really even tapping into. And so when you think about it, that's really where the opportunity to communicate and ultimately capitalize on that opportunity. Because if you think about it, it's internal development is a win-win for both, right? You have the employer benefits, where we get to keep and retain top critical talent, and the employees benefit, obviously, is that they get to grow and develop within the company. And so I thought what I might do first is maybe share a little bit of context on what Aera has gone through, and maybe I'll start to, or preface it with, recognizing that companies as well as individuals are going to be at different places in this career journey. And Aera certainly was, and maybe the unique opportunity that I've had in being with the company for 20 years, is that I've actually had a chance to see that growth as well, which may be somewhat unique in this day and age, where not many people have the maybe length of service in one company anymore. And it was somewhat ironic, as I was preparing for this presentation or talk, I realized that my opportunity, and I'll share it a little bit later, I've probably only physically moved about 20 feet in my career. My desk has been on the same floor in the same building, and so it's been pretty interesting, though, to see kind of the journey that we've gone in. So maybe first I'll start and maybe not assume that everybody knows who Aera is. And so we're a California upstream oil and gas exploration and production companies. So that essentially means we pull the oil out of the ground, primarily on the west side of the valley, and we send it down to the refineries, which is downstream, and that's where they make the end products, whether it's polymers or gasoline or products that are petroleum based. So we're headquartered in Bakersfield. We have about 1,100 employees across the state, and we generate about over $1 billion a year in revenue. And ultimately, our goal and our mission is to responsibly deliver energy that California needs. And I realize that may be somewhat challenging in the current environment that we're in the political environment, but certainly we believe that we're doing something critical that Californians need by producing that energy. And so, when we go into Aera's kind of journey around career development, we kind of like to use this plan, do, check, act process, I guess, for clarity. And when I think back historically, the plan that we initially put in place was started probably back in 2014, 2015, and discussions probably happened even before then, where the company started seeing maybe the writing on the wall, or whatever the right analogy might be, where we were going to lose a lot of our experienced talent for people due to retirement. And so, we put the plan in place, which we called an organizational transition, and we started to create actions, or we started doing things to make sure that we were going to be prepared for these people that were leaving. So we wouldn't necessarily lose the knowledge, right? So we were doing knowledge management. We started setting in career paths so that people have or were able to see those paths, right? So we tried to make it a little more visible. And then, unfortunately, the price of oil fell out early in 2016. I think ironically, or maybe fortunately, it actually provided us, or not fortunate, I guess I'll say that our leadership was astute enough to take that opportunity to perform a check, right? So we paused, we said, okay, we no longer have the capability or the resources to continue to deliver a lot of these programs, but are they performing like we expect them to be performing, right? So we're going back and checking the usefulness, we're checking the value. So we started doing engagement surveys. We started, doing look backs on what was important or what was working and what was not working. And what came out of it was pretty interesting, was that it wasn't about the tools that we made. It was that the value came from the fact that employees and their boss were having conversations, right? So whether it was about, what their career was, what their career path was, the fact that they had a conversation about, here's what my interests are, here's where I'd like to go, that was where the value came in. And then the tool was something that they used to kind of help shepherd the process, but ultimately the tool itself didn't make career development successful by the tool itself. And so as we then went back and we realized, okay, we need to step away from tools itself and really go back to the fundamentals. And so this is in the ACT stage, where really since 2017, we've been working on refreshing a lot of our different programs, whether it's our performance and development process or performance and development cycle. We started realizing that, okay, if the value came in the conversations, we needed to make sure that leaders and employees were having conversations, right? So we started creating those processes that ensured that leaders and employees were having conversations. We also recognized that we needed to develop our leaders so that they were comfortable having those conversations, right? So they knew, they understood what the expectation was to help those employees figure out how to develop and grow. And then now, as we've started to kick off those career conversations, and we might even have some of my colleagues on the line now, some leaders are better than others too, right? So leaders are even in their own development journey to figure out how to be helpful. And so I think, the stage that we're kind of at right now is we're starting to, recognize the value of the information that's collected in those career conversations, and managers as a collective group are now talking about it, right? So now they're helping one another as leaders advocate or broker, for lack of a better term, opportunities or experiences to provide that development. Whereas we didn't have that information before because we didn't have the conversation, we didn't know, we weren't necessarily collecting it in a place that was usable. And now we are, and so we're starting to have those talent reviews where we're talking about, how do we ensure people are reaching their, or where we're meeting their interests and they're reaching their aspirations. And then, hopefully as time progresses, we're also going to see the visibility of those opportunities improve as well, because our surveys, our engagement surveys continue to show that employees still aren't able to see those opportunities. And so the hope is that as conversations continue to happen, one, they'll be more visible, but two, we'll also be working on how to simplify opportunities for employees to apply for movement between positions, or even just loan employees between departments to work on a project. And so that'll be interesting to kind of see where we go. Oops, wrong direction. All right, so hopefully that kind of set a little bit of context around where Aera's been and maybe the journey that we've been on. But maybe I'll pause there and go back and say, okay, well, now what do you need to do in order to start your plan? Because I think that's ultimately what's in it for you. And I think that the three kind of key components that we'll talk about now is first, you kind of have to understand your career interests and aspirations. And then we'll talk a little bit about what I call career dualities. I don't know if that's the right phrase or not, but they're essentially spectrums that you kind of have to balance where you place value. And then the third part is you obviously have to understand or explore, evaluate, what the company's value proposition is, or what is the benefit that the company provides to you, right? Why would you want to go and work for the company that you're with, or potentially a prospective company that you might be evaluating? Let's see. So first on the career interests and aspirations, right, is ultimately it's the question of what do you want to be when you grow up, right? And so you've got to think about, or I encourage you to think about, either it could be specific positions or it could be general roles. It's something that you're wanting to grow towards. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be ready for them right now, right? You think a little bit shorter term, that 3 to 5 year range. You think a little bit longer term, 5 to 7 plus, right? Of where does that trajectory, or where do you want to be in 7 years? And then you also probably need to think about, is it a subject matter expert path, right, or a technical expert in your discipline, or do you want to go the formal leadership route, which obviously may have some implications of getting broader experience across the organization versus a deep knowledge of one particular subject matter. And so as you then think about that, then you think about what types of experiences do you need to build that capability. And I'd encourage you, don't just think literally about, okay, if I need to move from this job to another official job, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're jumping up or promoting up. You also may be moving laterally across the organization in order to have that broadening assignment. But you also think about different projects, different experiences. You have different formal leadership opportunities. You could decide informal leadership opportunities. The fact that you're in Bakersfield Young Professionals, right, is that outside network where you're building opportunities to show or expand your leadership capabilities, and then thinking about different trainings that you might have, right? So if you do a lot of this legwork up front as you're preparing for that conversation with your leader, then you can have a more constructive conversation with them about, okay, now how can you help me get there, boss, right? And that way you're not putting it on them to go figure out how you develop. You've already put some thought into it about how you're going to get there. Now, the other component is you obviously want to think about, when are you ready to move, right? you have some of your own personal aspirations, right? Maybe you don't feel like you're quite ready. Maybe you want to get a little bit more experience in the current role that you're in. But I also think you need to be realistic, right? Based on what you're looking at in the company. Is it something that, you know, with the low oil price right now, is it something that you would expect to move every, you know, 1 year, right? Every 16 months, 18 months, what type of expectation do you have, right? Because each company might have a slightly different model or what's the right phrase, maybe assumption on frequency of moves, and those would be conversations, again, that you'd be able to bring up with your leader at that time, just so that you can evaluate whether those opportunities align with your aspirations. And then I think you've got to think about the opportunity cost, right? You have to decide what you're going to give up, and then others, you know, what you're not willing to give up. And so, you know, in my introduction, and I'll probably share a little more on the at the end, right, is, as you could tell from my my family's love for animals, that was a particular priority. Now, that was more personal than professional, but I probably can't run a business at home and necessarily expect to have the same career trajectory because I was placing my time, my limited 24 hours in a day, right, had to be split up into different fields, and as a result, that was what I chose to be of value. And so, as you think about that, you know, think about what those opportunity costs are. And then there's a component around the you know, what are you good at, and what can you leverage, whether it's the skills or the behaviors. And then there's the opposite side of that is, you know, what are your development opportunities? And you have to think about both personal development as well as professional development, right? Those are the behaviors that are probably more on the personal side. On the professional side, it may be more of the skills. And there's obviously that self-reflection. I think there's also an opportunity to get feedback on blind spots that you might not be aware of. So whether it's using your peers that are here on the call with Bakersfield Young Professionals, if you have a good network and you can ask for good coaching from them, might be a little more you know, or I guess other resources that you might have, mentors, and that kind of brings me maybe to the next slide, is as you're thinking about feedback and thinking about opportunities to develop, you're also thinking about what resources do you have available to help you get that experience or grow, right? So you're thinking about colleagues, you're thinking about mentors, you're thinking about trainings, and so that's really what you're looking at to help you develop in those opportunities where you might be lacking. So hopefully that's making sense. And I think as we jump into the career dualities piece, I think you'll start to hear some of the things I've already been kind of alluding to. So from the dualities standpoint, as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of a spectrum, right? There's some will have extremes where you can't really have both at the same time. Others you're going to have to figure out kind of how to balance. And so, you know, from one component, right, there's the results versus the behaviors, right? What you get done versus how you get it done, right? There's going to be a balance that you play. Is, you know, you can be the most intelligent person in the room, but if no one likes to work with you, then that's going to be pretty challenging to get things done, right? And so you're going to have to find that balance of getting things done, but not necessarily leaving bodies in their wake. And so there's going to be conversations around, you know, gaps that you might have from a behavior standpoint that may either get in the way of the results or cloud the results because of how you went about getting them, or, you know, you might not get enough results because you're too nice, right? And so you're going to have to balance that. You know, the next one, when you're talking about, and like we alluded to earlier, right, there's experiences and there's job changes, right? So, and maybe using my personal example, right, is I have not moved out of HR in 20 years. I have physically only moved about 20 feet in the office through my different experiences. Frankly, I've had the same job title for 20 years. right? That doesn't necessarily mean that I haven't had all of the different experiences, right? So between worked on, I'm the subject matter expert for immigration for the company. I've done onboarding, I've done campus recruiting. So all of those different experiences I've had all within the same job, right? And I might have had different bosses at different times, but ultimately the same job. And so just think about, where you might be able to get those experiences without necessarily having to change those jobs. And then on other cases, you might have to physically change. So the third one is around the progression versus promotion. So that was where we were talking about the lateral movement to grow those skills, which is more the progression, and the promotion is whether you're climbing up the proverbial ladder and moving to the next grade or getting a pay in or a promotional increase as a result of getting new responsibilities. So there's going to be different ways to grow, whether it's through progression or promotion. And then there's the professional versus personal, and I think you've already heard me kind of reference the fact that you're going to have to evaluate where your priorities are, right? Where do you want to prioritize the limited time that you have? Are there personal components or personal factors that weigh in heavier than professional? And then the last one is around, whether or not you're comfortable moving internally and moving around the company, or are you more comfortable with jumping or moving to two different companies in order to get that experience or increase your skills? And so you're going to have to evaluate whether that's something of importance to you as well. So after you've kind of thought about the dualities, you've thought about your career interests and aspirations, now you can kind of turn the table, if you will, or turn the camera onto the company that you're working for. And ultimately, you then need to get to know the company culture, right? And that's essentially, what components of a company make you want to work there. And so, at Aera, and I think where HR and some of the companies are starting to talk about a phrase called an employee value proposition. And that essentially answers the question of why would you want to work for the company that you're working for, right? For me, why do I want to work for Aera? And, generally, the culture is what displays the reasons for why you'd want to work there. And ultimately, it kind of guides the company's decisions on whether, well, I guess maybe as the slide says, it guides the employees to consider whether a decision supports or undermines the experience that they're trying to create, right? And so it's really an aspired culture, and I think this is the part where as you're talking to your leader and as you're exploring the culture, right? And as I referenced a little bit earlier, right, is companies are growing as well, right? So they may say this is what they want, they may not quite be there yet, and they're working on it. And so you get a chance to evaluate how much of that are you willing to wait for and help grow with them, or how much of it is, I need to go somewhere else because the way they're going doesn't align with what my personal interests or aspirations are, right? And that's really where you now get to decide, okay, am I aligned with where the company is wanting to go? Because I think most companies, and I know certainly at Aera, we don't want people to be miserable at work. You're going to be spending way too much time at work to be miserable. And so we'd certainly want you to be able to find something that's both meaningful to you, as well as a company that's willing to provide you or show you that value that you add to the company. So in Aera's case, our aspired culture is that we're committed to inspire people to connect, grow, and thrive both inside and outside of work. And so those three components, connect, grow, and thrive, are things that guide our decisions about programs that we want to offer, about decisions that we may want to do. Is that the experience that we're trying to create? And so I've obviously been talking long enough, so I wanted to have a little bit of group interaction. And so if you want, pull out your laptop, pull out your phone. I guess probably pull out your phone. Hopefully your laptop's not in your pocket. But go to menti.com, and there's going to be a couple questions. The first one is kind of on the screen, but as I pull up Menti, let me pull this over to the screen. And what I wanted to get your perspective on is, what are examples of how a company shows their culture? And that way, as you might be kind of like, wow, culture seems kind of like a gray area. I don't quite know what that means. Figured I'd get some participation from the group. So use the code at the top, 946003 and then 6. And you should see the question that's on the screen pop up on your mobile device. All right, and so
what was that code again?
946003 and 6. And Francis, I don't know if you're able to maybe put that in the chat box.
Yeah.
And so I think it allows you to put as many, I think it allows you to just keep submitting. I don't think I restricted it, but as you start seeing, and as more people put items in, you'll start to see the list expand, and the 3 sides will actually start scrolling. And so I'll go through and read some of them as we get more. So one's collaboration, one's commitment to community involvement, dog eat dog. That's an interesting one. So I think what that means is it's claw your way to the top at any cost. Inclusion and diversity. I think it's diversity, or diversify. Okay. We'll take a couple more minutes and let people get on to Menti and provide their input too. How managers treat employees. It's a good one. Personal and professional life balance. Okay, maybe as a precursor to the next question, that's going to be what's important for you. So if you're thinking about these now too, these might give you some ideas of how you might want to answer the next question. So the programs and paths given to team members in order to develop in their roles, collaboration, cohesive. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go to the next question then, just as you keep thinking about it. Let's see if I can. Okay, so what are the 3 most important things that you want from your current employer? So now you're kind of providing that, shifting it to say, okay, now what is it that you're actually wanting from your employer? And that could be a cultural thing as well. It could be more money, could be more time off, could be more meaningful work. And this one will actually be a word cloud. So as you start to see the larger the print, the more frequent that phrase is used. So security, respect, money, growth, open door. All right, so it looks like they're all about the same size. So it looks like they might be about the same. There we go. Now we're starting to get a couple more in. So growth is respect, equivalent compensation. All right. Support. Looks like respect and growth seems to be a pretty common one based on the ethical, open door, clear role expectations, telecommute, support, more vacation, appreciation, respect of time off. That's a good one. Any of you office followers, maybe you didn't get the memo. All right. So hopefully that kind of helps as you're thinking about now as you talk about you thought about your career interests, you work through the dualities, and now as you start to think about, okay, what's important to you, ultimately you're going to want to try to find an employer that aligns with what you need or want. Right? And over time that may change, right? I mean, you might think about this in a couple of years and say, you know what, life has changed. If you're newly out of college and you don't have any strings attached, no significant others, no kids to haul around with you, maybe you have a different aspiration. And then as you start to find that special someone, you start having kids, you start adding to your menagerie of animals like I did, right? You ultimately might have those needs change. And so I think the important part, and let me get back to the presentation, is that, I think is that you figure out what's important to you, and you kind of stick to your guns, and you talk to your leader ultimately about it. So you've kind of heard a little bit of my story as I've weaved it into the presentation, but maybe I'll kind of maybe finish it off and then leave you with kind of 5 takeaways, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, because I think I'm already at about 45 minutes. So as I mentioned, I've worked at Aera for 20 years. I've been in one location, in one department, one job title, in one company, but ultimately I've had multiple experiences. And as I started reflecting on my own journey, as I was thinking and preparing about this presentation, I realized that my previous bosses we didn't have any of those conversations, right? We didn't necessarily know what we needed to do, and I didn't know either, right? Or I didn't have that courage to have the conversation with him, or with him or her at the time. And ultimately, it wasn't until I started working on this refresh for the whole company's performance and development cycle that my last boss actually introduced me to those dualities, and we started having the conversation around, okay, do you recognize where you're placing value, what you're willing to give up, what you're not willing to give up. He was actually talking to me about some of my performance, right, and how I'm showing up. And so we had those conversations to make sure that I actually understood what gaps I might need to close in order to reach my aspiration, right? None of that really happened prior to. And so the fact that we started working that within our own talent team as we were stewarding it for the whole company, I really started to see a shift in kind of where, I guess maybe in my overall appreciation for my career, and recognizing that Aera did a great job, unbeknownst to me, of providing for my family, even though I didn't necessarily know it or recognize it, right? As I placed more value in my personal priorities than I did in my professional priorities. And that was my choice, right? But ultimately, I still had multiple experiences. I didn't have to move around, and that was what was important to me, right? I didn't want to have to move every 2 years. I didn't want to have to leave California. I wanted to create roots. I liked the security based on the word cloud, right? And Aera has certainly met that, and that's what I'm certainly fortunate for, or appreciative of. So here's kind of my 5 takeaways, and I see there's some questions starting to come in too. So ultimately, find your value, find where you place your value, have those courageous conversations with your leader. Remember that it's a journey. Give yourself some space, give yourself some grace, give your employer some grace to help grow with you. But know that partnership is key. And be willing to check back in with each other, right? Because that's typically what good partners do, right? They check in on occasion. And then ultimately, find a company that aligns with what your interests are. And if after the conversations with your leaders, the company that you may be with now, or maybe were in the past, if they don't align, just be confident that the work that you did to think through all of this will certainly help you, kind of flush out the next company that you go to, so that you can find a career that ultimately aligns with your own interests and aspirations. So with that, I will maybe say, what questions do you have or experiences that you want to share? Because I also recognize that experiences are a powerful connector in your networks too. So if someone else has experienced something similar, it's a little bit easier to reach out and grow together. So with that, let's see. Let me see if I can figure out how to get to the chat.
It looks like we have a few in the chat. I can read them out for you, Ryan, if you'd like.
Okay.
So our first
yeah, go ahead.
Our first one says, what did or hasn't worked either for yourself or for Aera?
That's a great question. I assume that's Tanner says, or at least that's what it says. You know, I think what didn't necessarily work for me sometimes was, you know, the first 6 months I was with Aera was pretty rough, because I was waiting for my boss to provide the direction. And I think most companies hire you to set that direction, right? And so it was a pretty interesting transition from college, where I was used to a syllabus that the teacher told me what to do, and I went and did it, right? To my boss that said, hey, we hired you to set up the college recruiting and intern program. You know, how come that's not done yet? And she didn't say it that way. But what I had to recognize, was that I had to be confident in myself and confident in my view. Now, as I progressed through my career and different opportunities, what I realized was I also didn't connect back to my leader at the time, and it had subsequently changed, but you know, he didn't necessarily see the same value that I felt I was adding. And so that conversation that I wasn't having with my boss also was not helping him set me up for success, right? So I was doing things, I felt comfortable that I was adding value to the company. That wasn't ever a concern in my mind. But when I didn't include my boss in my conversation, he didn't know what I was doing, right? And so he couldn't then advocate for me if there were different opportunities that would have come up to help me grow. And he didn't necessarily then know what my gaps were either. So it was a little bit like, you know, I would maybe had put myself out onto an island without a whole lot of support around me. So, and then I think for Aera, it's not that it didn't work. I think it was the fact that we created a lot of programs without necessarily having the foundation, and that's what this Plan, Do, Check, Act really helped. You know, as I reflect on it, we had to go back to the fundamentals. And we realized that, oh shoot, the fact that we're not having the conversation, that was the part that maybe didn't work. And so once we realized that, and you know, I may put Tanner a little bit on the spot, but the conversation that we had with him, he had that foresight to have the challenging conversation with his boss, and it actually helped him as well. So so maybe I'll stop there, so I don't take the whole one question to answer the whole time. So, so the next one is, what to
well, that
do
kind of
if a
leads
company
into
or a
the
leader
next
doesn't
question we
want to
have.
talk about and or really doesn't want open discussions? Yeah, that's a good question, because you know, and I guess I recall one specific conversation I had with one of my bosses when I was transitioning into a different role, and you know, it was essentially, you know, hey boss, if you're expecting me to learn from the person that was you know, my mentor, or the person that, yeah, I guess it would be my mentor, you know, she needs to provide me with more information. I'm kind of waiting for cookie crumbs that she's dropping and letting me pick it up to learn. And it wasn't a very constructive conversation, but he also wasn't necessarily willing to sit down and talk about it. So, you know, maybe in retrospect, I probably could have come at it slightly differently. But I think to answer your question is, and it might even be for the formal leaders that might be on the call, right? It is trying to figure out when the appropriate time is to try those conversations, right? And I guess what I'll say is how much time are you willing to wait, right? And because, as I had mentioned earlier, right, is the employers will also be on that journey, right? And it may take them time to realize the value or the fact that they're missing those discussions, right? And so if I'd say if those leaders aren't open to those discussions, then you might look for, you know, mentors or potentially other leaders that are within the same company to see whether or not they would be willing to have those conversations, right? Because ultimately any leader in the company, if they're at the, you know, maybe in the right mindset, is any conversation is an opportunity to help people grow, whether they physically report to you or not. And so there may be other leaders within the company that may be better at those conversations than your current one. And then those may be the opportunities where you can then express interest to that other leader. That other leader becomes your advocate versus your direct supervisor. Particularly if you look at the company as a whole and the company culture, and you say that everything else is good except for that one boss that might be kind of in the way, maybe, so to speak, you know, then you could certainly leverage other leaders within the company to kind of help shepherd your development and growth. So is there other questions? Any other stories that people are willing to share to maybe what they've learned in their own journey?
If anyone wants to come off of mute, you can unmute yourself and ask your question or share your story.
Hi, Ryan. This is Patrick. Something I would like to share. Through my years of my career, something that always stuck to me is that you don't get what you don't ask for. So it's very important to speak up, whether that be your supervisor or those who are in a position to offer you an opportunity. So definitely make your desires known, not just near to your supervisors, but those around them.
Yeah, that's great, Patrick. Yeah, they don't know unless you tell them, and that's kind of what we're experiencing even as we're starting in these talent reviews. Is, you know, and what we've started, at least to initiate, was requiring the company post all internal jobs just so that it's visible. And it was interesting. And once we kind of put that in place, we posted a couple jobs, and some feedback we got from leaders. I didn't realize they were interested. It was like, okay, well, did you have a conversation with them? So, but, and again, it's not all on the leader, right? It's on the employee in that partnership to hopefully feel comfortable, like Patrick said, to make your desires known, right? And hopefully the companies can provide that opportunity. But that's where those courageous conversations come in. Is the worst, well, it's worth trying, right? I don't think someone's going to fire you for asking or wanting to talk about career interests and aspirations, right? So thanks, Patrick.
Are there any other questions or stories someone would like to share? I have a question for you, Ryan. If no one else wants to jump off mute, would you consider it kind of a red flag if you're looking at different companies and you notice that there's a lot of like external recruitment versus the internal mobility that you were seeing, or you kind of heard that they don't usually promote from within, and the company's kind of like a jumping point, like to go further into your career? Would you consider that kind of like a red flag to work for that company?
No, I wouldn't consider that in itself a red flag. I mean, I think generally as we look at resumes and as people, hopefully you would see kind of a progression of responsibility as they move from company to company. I think if obviously it maybe declines from, manager to individual contributor to well, that's probably not the right phrase either, because I think you might also realize that once you get into a leadership role, maybe you don't want to do the leadership track. So it's also not bad to jump back to be an individual contributor or vice versa as your needs change. But I think you'd like to see that increased responsibility as they're moving jobs. But I'd also recognize that as people move, needs change. Sometimes locations will change. I know if I were not with Aera and if I were with another company and they were to move out of the state, I probably would have left that company because I wanted to stay in California, right? So I think those are and maybe as the person going into the interview, right, is you might want to think about how would you address the question around the moves that you've made, right? It could be, did you move frequently? Because sometimes employers will look at, well, you moved every 2 years. Okay, well, you might be able or be ready to speak to that, right? Why did you move every 2 years? What was the experiences that you gained as a result of those moves, right? So you focus less on the duration of time that you were there and more on, the skills that you gained by the fact that you were moving. Now, I think some of that also then may start to speak to what you're placing your value in, right? Is it more important for you to climb and as a result move around companies, and then what you might get from Aera because of the different relatively flat structure that Aera has is that you don't have that same potential to move up a whole lot of levels because we don't have a whole lot of levels, right? And so that becomes a conversation that we have with employees that they have to understand that we don't have a whole lot of levels within the organization, and sometimes that fits and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, I think maybe one of the best examples that I can think of from an employee value proposition, balance between candidate and Aera, for example, is since we only operate in California, if one of your aspirations is to travel the world, on company time and work all over the globe, it's not going to happen with Aera. And so if you decide to accept our offer, if that's your long-term goal, both you and Aera is going to have to be comfortable that, you may only be at Aera for a short period of time because you're going to want to go to other jobs and other experiences. And I think as a company, we're having to get comfortable that there's not a whole lot of people that I think the average tenure now within a company is between 5 and 7 years. So we're also not getting the lifelong employees. You're not getting the 20-year service employees with nearly the same number that you used to in previous generations. So hopefully that helped answer your question. Long answer to a short.
Thank you. It looks like we have one more question in the chat. What are your thoughts on upward feedback assessments on leaders at companies?
That's a great question. My thoughts are, I would hope if the leader is of the same growth mindset as at least what Aera is trying to do, is that leader should also be open to upward feedback because they're also wanting to grow. They're wanting to understand how they're showing up, how they're helping their employees develop. And I think if they're not willing to learn and grow, then I think that becomes something that in my mind is a little bit troubling because we don't hire people to stop learning. And we certainly wouldn't want to promote leaders that don't want to continue to grow. And so I know historically, we've continued to think about how to help leaders grow, but it's always the dilemma between how do they continue to it becomes a balancing act of their time, right? Is how do they go and get the development that they need at the same time helping their own people develop. And it becomes and I think what has come up in a lot of our recent employee engagement is around the span of control, right? Is how many people are managers responsible for? And so that becomes then difficult sometimes for them to figure out how to weave in their own development. But I think upward feedback is certainly important for their own development.
Great.
Does that answer your question, Jessica?
Okay, she says yes. Thank you. It looks like we are just at 11:30. So before I wrap this up, Tanner is our BYP vice chair. I know he's on the call. I'm not sure if he wants to jump off mute and say anything before we finish up. If you're able to. Oh, maybe not. All right. Well, I want to thank you, Ryan, for joining us today and for your presentation. You had so much valuable information.
Sorry, were you trying to call me in?
Yeah, if you want to say anything before we finish up.
Okay. Yeah. No. My phone switched to my car in the middle of that. So sorry about that. I just want to say, Ryan, thanks for taking the time. It was good. And, you know, from my personal experience, you know, you can have all the templates and documents and stuff in the world, but I think the thing, you know, to take away is having a simple conversation can really make the difference. And so, Ryan, thanks for sharing your experience and putting this together. I appreciate it.
Well, certainly. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. And for all the participants who are on the call today, you all will be entered into this week's BYP Virtual Summit Series giveaway. So Aera was kind enough to sponsor this week's prize. So we will be reaching out to the winners later today and posting it on social media. And I want to thank our summit sponsors again before we head off. Thank you to Kearney's Business Technology Center, Strata Credit Union, and Comprehensive Blood and Cancer Center. We would not be able to do these webinars without their support. So thank you so much. Thanks again, Ryan. It was great to have you on today. And I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Yeah, you too. Be safe.
Thanks, Ryan.